Okay, so I'm not going to be on camera for this video. My hay fever is in full swing, so I keep having to stop for massive sneezing bouts, and my nose is running like crazy, so I won't subject you to that. But I thought I'd do this video and talk about matching cameras and also workflow with the Mission 1 Pro, how you can match other cameras to it and the Mission 1 Pro to other cameras as well. I'm going to be using a plugin which I've mentioned before many times on my channel because I think it is absolutely brilliant. I'm going to be using Resolve, but the plugin I'm talking about is Cinematch, and it solves a whole load of problems that you might have when it comes to grading cameras like the Mission 1 Pro and maybe other cameras like the DJI series as well. What I've done is I've taken some footage earlier today from the Action 6 and from the Mission 1 Pro. So let's tackle our first problem with the Mission 1 Pro when we are using footage from it in DaVinci Resolve. Okay, so I took some footage earlier today, and let's take some of that and put it on the timeline. So that's nice and sunny. So this is shot in GP Log 2. Now, anyone who uses Resolve knows that unlike Insta360's iLog, which is now within Resolve, so you can use it within color managed workflows, GP Log has never been in Resolve. And it's a bit of a frustration for a lot of people, including myself, because you have to use a color space transform. And because the color space transform doesn't actually have GP Log in it, you have to treat it as Rec 709. With the Mission 1 Pro, you need to treat it as Rec 2020. So if you're not using the plugin that I'm going to be using today, just use Rec 2020 on your input color space for GP Log 2, not Rec 709, even if you're going out to Rec 709 at the very end of your workflow. So let's get to it with Cinematch. So it's by the company who makes FilmConvert, the film emulation plugin. And I'm really surprised that Cinematch doesn't get mentioned more by any other creator. I seem to be the only person who mentions it or talks about it. So Cinematch is designed so that you can match one camera to another camera. So if you're using multiple cameras from different manufacturers on a shoot, you can match the color science between them. And then you get it's much easier to pull the images closer together so it doesn't look like a jarring change when you go from one shot to the other. Now, I'm going to be talking about matching the Mission 1 Pro footage to other cameras and other cameras to the Mission 1 Pro in just a bit. And the reason I'm going to talk about that is because you might have a Mission 1 Pro, but you might want to use a DJI drone to get aerial shots with, and you need to be able to match the two together so there isn't a jarring difference. But first of all, let's just deal with one of the common problems with Mission 1 Pro footage and GP Log footage in general, and that is that the built-in color space transform within Resolve doesn't have GP Log as an option. Cinematch, on the other hand, does. So what we can do, we can use Cinematch in a way it wasn't really intended for, but it does the job very well indeed. So let's take our source camera, which is a GoPro Mission 1 Pro, and you see it automatically goes to GP Log 2 Rec 2020. There is no standard color profile built within this. It's built to deal with GP Log 2, not the standard color profiles. But then what we can do here is we can set our target camera back to the Mission 1 Pro and GP Log. And if I turn this on and off, this node on and off, there is no difference. It's not doing anything, which is exactly what we want. Because Cinematch can perform the color space transform in one hit. So we'll be doing that when we do the matching of the cameras later on, but I can show you how, even if you're not wanting to match to other cameras, you can use it instead of DaVinci Resolve's built-in color transform. So our input space is our selected camera, and our output space is our DaVinci Intermediate. And that has done that in one hit. And then what we can do on our output, I'm going to use a DCTL. You need the studio version of Resolve to do this. If you have the free version of Resolve, just use a color space transform to transform back from DaVinci Intermediate back out to Rec 709, which is what you'll need when you're outputting for the web and whatever. So I'm going to put a DCTL here instead. It's just my preference, and use my output there. And hey presto, we now have our Mission 1 Pro footage converted properly to the Rec 709 color space. And this is our before and this is our after. So then we can do all our grading within this area here, or we can even use Cinematch to do some adjustments to exposure before the color space transform. And we can use our adjustments here, and we can adjust the temperature and whatever. This is a really neat way of working with all GoPro footage, because you can select any of the GoPros, because what Cinematch does is they've profiled each of the cameras that they have available on the list at almost a sensor level. So they've analyzed all these cameras and matched the color spaces. They profile the color spaces of all these cameras so they can match one to the other and convert back and forth. You can use any of the GoPros here on the list. So it goes back to the Hero 10, 11, 12, and even back to the Hero 8 with the flat color profile. So some of the cameras do have the flat color profiles available if they didn't have log available. As you can see here, we've got the ability to make all our grade adjustments within this. So we might want to do a saturation adjustment, so like those, and I can use my saturation here. Just boost that a bit. I've got subtle control over it doing this way. If you use HSV color space and turn off channels 1 and 2, you get really precise control over your saturation. So I just turn off that node, on off, and it's, actually that's a pretty good result just straight off the bat. Pretty usable, very quick. Okay, right. So what happens if we want to match the Mission 1 Pro to another camera, or we want to go vice versa? Well, okay, let's take that same bit of footage and put that on the timeline, and we'll get the Action 6 on the same shot. So I'll set this up so I've got split screen. So we've got our Action 6 on the left here, and we've got our Mission 1 Pro. And so the Action 6 is shot in D-Log M, and obviously GP Log 2 on the Mission 1 Pro. Okay, so what we're going to do is, because the Action 6 technically has less dynamic range on paper than the Mission 1 Pro, D-Log M isn't really a true log profile. So what I'm going to do is match to the lowest common denominator, which on paper is the Action 6. So I'm going to take the Cinematch plugin and put that on the GoPro like timeline. By the way, Blackmagic, if you're listening to this or watching this, it's really annoying when you click on a clip within the timeline section of DaVinci Resolve grading section, and it always jumps to the frame at the beginning. It's really frustrating, because if I want to adjust that frame, I want to adjust that frame. I don't want it jumping back. I've no idea why it keeps doing that, and why they haven't just made it so it just stays in the same place. It's so annoying. Anyway, let's go to our Cinematch plugin. Our source camera is a GoPro, a Mission 1 Pro, GP Log 2, and we want our target camera to be the DJI Action 6 and D-Log M. So I'm not going to do our output color space just yet. Let's just take a look at that. And yeah, the Mission 1 Pro is slightly darker, but it's matching the color science. So it can't compensate from the way that the camera is performing exposure. So that's why we have our exposure compensation here. And by the way, you can actually do a Rec 709 transform within the Cinematch plugin itself. If you just want to do a straight 709 output, you can do that. And you can, if I was to apply Cinematch and do the similar trick to what I did before by setting the input as the Action 6 and the output as the Action 6 and then doing a Rec 709 transform, it would do the same thing. But we're not going to do that. We're grading in log, or looking at things in the log profile, and we're going to do it that way. So we can see on our waveform the difference in exposure. I'm going to bring my exposure to match the Action 6. See what I can do here. There's our midpoint here as well that we can change. So just mess around with this. There is some slight differences here because there is some slightly different exposure. I think it might be a slightly different frame. We can see the highlight on my shoulder here compared with the Action 6. There's a slight difference in the tone of my shirt here, and we can adjust our tint as well to a degree, and our temperature. And I think this is the main reason why there are differences between the two, because the Action 6 is interpreting white balance in a different way to the Mission 1. So I used auto white balance on these two cameras for these shots, and that was a bit of a mistake. If you want to match cameras, I would suggest using a fixed white balance. And then you've got something consistent, then the cameras are not interpreting things differently throughout the shot. But having said that, if we look at this now, these cameras are fairly closely matched. I know there are still some slight differences here. I am showing you this quite quickly on an online tutorial, don't forget. But if you were to show someone these two images and say which cameras come from which, I don't think anyone would really be able to tell from a colour perspective. Ignore the detail on the Mission 1 Pro here. You will notice that the detail is showing better on the Action 6 here. And the reason for that is I have my noise reduction on the Mission 1 Pro set to low, except it didn't. I saw this when I was examining the footage earlier and went back into my settings on the Mission 1 Pro, and somehow it had gone to the high noise reduction setting. So that is the reason why this detail in the background looks like mush on the Mission 1 Pro. Is not a problem with the camera or a difference in the capability. It's just that for some reason, whatever reason, maybe it was a poltergeist, went into my Mission 1 Pro settings and set the noise reduction to high. But I've got some other footage we're going to show you a bit later on where I've got the camera in the correct setting. But yeah, if you look at this now, these are pretty well matched. You know, they're not exact. You can tweak it and you'll be able to do that. So now I can select my output color space to DaVinci Wide Gamut. And I can also do the same for the Action 6. So I'm going to just use the same trick that I used with the Mission 1 Pro earlier on. So now we've done the DaVinci intermediate transformation. There are some slight differences there, but we can work through that. So I'm going to set the output node. I'm going to put my DCTL on there, and same for the the Mission 1 Pro. Now we can see some big differences. So let's bring that exposure down. See, there are differences how it handles how the cameras handle the contrast. So if we look at this frame here, they look pretty similar. I can adjust this temperature a little bit, but I think maybe this is better to be done in the grade here. So let's just add a node for our color balance. Let's see if we can adjust that better on this. Let's have a look at where these lie. So it's slightly redder, isn't it? So it's more yellow maybe in the... So now we're getting closer. Now we're getting closer. So those are our two shots together. And yeah, I know I could go a bit further and match them even closer. But looking at that, you can see they are very, very close now. The main difference between them is the sharpness level. So with the Action 6, I had the sharpness set to -2 and the noise reduction set to -2. And on the GoPro, I had the sharpness set to low, which gives it an even softer looking image than the DJI. The DJI still stays fairly sharp even at -2 because I think it's still applying sharpening, whereas a Mission 1 Pro pretty much turns the detail enhancement off. So what I've been finding is that with the Mission 1 Pro, in order to get a similar sort of sharpness level to the Action 6, you need to bring this sharpening tool down to 0.47. This tool is a bit of a blunt instrument. There are better, more fine-tuned ways of adjusting your sharpness within Resolve, but I'm just going to use this today as an example. You can use a texture pop, and there's also a special sharpening plugin here where you can adjust the different frequencies, but let's just use the blunt instrument, and generally about 0.47 works fine. And then we can see the two side by side. Maybe the GoPro's gone a little bit sharper than the Action 6 in this instance, so maybe 0.48. That's pretty similar now to the Action 6. We're going to 200% zoom. Let's take a look. That's Mission 1 Pro. And that is the Action 6. And we look in the background here, I mean, look, they are almost identical now. Incidentally, I've seen some people posting up that the Mission 1 Pro is out of focus beyond 5 meters or something silly. It's nonsense. As you can see, this is exactly the same as the Mission 1 Pro, as the Action 6 pretty much. And we can see the hedgerow in the background here. They're almost identical. The grass here, apart from that noise reduction, as I say, that I accidentally applied, which is smudging everything out. But as far as I'm concerned, okay, there's less detail on my skin on the Mission 1 Pro. That again is because I had the accidental noise reduction setting set to high. That's not, the Mission 1 Pro can't reproduce that detail. We're looking at color mainly in this, but you can see they are pretty much identical now that we've done the color match. And there's some minor differences in the tree there and whatever. But you can see that when you use Cinematch, you can use it as a tool to really match these cameras, and as near as damn it, you're not going to tell the difference. In a blind test, I challenge anyone to be able to tell me which is the Mission 1 Pro and which is the Action 6 if they weren't told in this particular instance. So we can go the opposite way as well. We can match the Action 6 to the Mission 1 Pro. So let's take this shot. So this is on the Action 6 and the Mission 1 Pro. So these are the two cameras. And, if we look at them side by side, there are differences there. It's when we transform them into Rec 709 that the differences become more apparent. So let's get the Cinematch going. So this is on the Action 6, which is on the left-hand side, don't forget. And our input camera is the Action 6 D-Log M, and our target camera is the GoPro Mission 1 Pro. Our output color space to be DaVinci Intermediate. And we also want to do the same for the Mission 1 Pro as well, because we want a color grading pipeline. So we're going to match our Mission 1 Pro to a Mission 1 Pro. And as you can see now, they're fairly close already. The differences will become more apparent when we add our output transform node. So again, I'm going to use the DCTL, or like I say, if you're on the free version of Resolve, you can use a standard color space transform. That's no problem at all. Got DCTL in there. They are actually fairly close. There's some very minor differences there. There seems to be a difference in saturation, I think, there. And if we look at our waveform, they are very close. So I think one of the main differences there is the exposure level. So we can bring that down on the Action 6. And our black point maybe can be reduced. So if we look at this area here, just bring your exposure back up so that these two match. And then I think maybe some saturation perhaps. I mean, that's looking really close. There's a slight difference here. So let's see if we can sort that out. I think maybe I'll do this on another adjustment node again. Let's go here, color bars that we can see on our vector scope where things are lying. On the 2x zoom. So that's kind of going off towards cyan and blue, slightly offset down towards the bottom right. And this is more in the center, isn't it? So what we need to do is we need to add a little bit more red and yellow into it. Actually, less yellow, should I say? Let's see where we are. We might not get an exact match, but quite subtle with it. I might be here all day, but I think in general, you know, if we look at the overall shot, some differences in exposure, you can see that difference there on those. Let's just take, it's probably a bit too much red. Is that closer? Looks a little bit closer. That's pretty close. Slight differences in the skin tone there. So maybe there's a bit too much saturation. I introduced a bit too much saturation into that, didn't I? And yeah, we can see that lining up now on the vector scope. We can see the two actually aligning more. So that's got us more in the ballpark. So if I turn my saturation adjustment off, you can see the difference there on that particular part of the shot. You need to see if it works throughout, but I think, yeah, pretty much for the most part, that is looking very, very close indeed. As I say, you could tweak this for a long time and get an even better match, but we can see that again, looking between the two, there are very, very minor differences. And as I say, with the Mission 1, we do need to add some sharpening in, and there are some variances going on here with how the cameras are exposing, but yeah, we can adjust for those things. But I think in general, it's pretty close. Once the cameras have settled into their relative exposures and their white balances, you can see that they are very, very close indeed. But yeah, so that is another way of doing it. You can go the other way, matching the Action 6 to the Mission 1 Pro, or your DJI drone to a Mission 1 Pro, or vice versa. And what Cinematch will do for you is it will generally speed things up in terms of matching. And as I say, if you set your white balance, you're going to save yourself quite a few of these little headaches that you've been seeing today, where I'm having to deal with tint shifts and all that kind of stuff. But there is another way that I like using Cinematch. And I've done these grades earlier on. So let's go back to this shot. So what you got here is the shot with the manufacturer's LUT, default LUT on it on the Action 6. And I've just experimented by putting Tamara Gabriel's tone boost LUT on it. So you can see what happens if I turn that on and off. But the great thing is that on the GoPro, you can convert the GoPro using Cinematch to the Action 6, and then you can use Tamara Gabriel's tone boost LUT on the Mission 1 Pro footage. You've got your sharpening there, a little bit of adjustment on exposure I think I did there. But again, as you can see, they look pretty much the same, you know, apart from some very minor things that, you know, you can sort those out. But the other way to do things is this way. So I'm just going to bring up my alternative grades here. And what is the king daddy of color science? Well, it's Arri, isn't it? So what I've done in these grades is I have taken both cameras and I've output them as an Arri Alexa in Log C. So I've converted both cameras to Arri Alexa, color science, and the Log 3C. You know, I've gone through some extra matching. It is a little bit more difficult to match the cameras doing this, but I think the results are pretty cool. So I've matched the cameras as closely as I can. And if I go to my other grade on the Action 6, that's what it looks like with Tamara's tone boost LUT on it. And that's what it looks like with the Arri Alexa color science. And I'll do the same with the GoPro. Oh, that's the tone boost LUT. And then that's the Arri Alexa. You know, see which one you like best. Kind of like both, actually. And then that one is just the basic GoPro cinematic LUT. But yeah, you can see what you can do with Cinematch. And like I said, I don't think, you know, anyone who is serious would be able to look at those two images in a blind test and be able to tell me which camera was which. I wouldn't believe them if they told me. So I really hope that's given you some ideas, particularly of how to use Cinematch, but also on how you can deal with the GoPro Mission 1 Pro GP Log 2 within Resolve, even if Resolve doesn't have GP Log 2 built into it. You can get around it with the Cinematch plugin. So if you head on over to FilmConvert, you can purchase a plugin there. I'm not affiliated with them in any way, shape or form, so I don't get any commission on any sales they make, but check it out. I find it to be a really, really useful plugin. And when Resolve doesn't have a camera profile that I need built into it, you can be fairly sure that Cinematch will. And I fully expect them to be profiling cameras like the Luna Ultra and also, you know, the Pocket 4P. They've got all the Pocket series here. They've got the Red cameras. They've got Kinefinity, Blackmagic Design, Arri, the iPhone, you name it. If it's a popular camera, they profile it and they make the profile available. And all the profiles are free to download once you've bought the plugin. So it's a great plugin to have, and I hope this has been really useful. I'm sorry that this video isn't quite as visually interesting as my usual stuff, perhaps, thanks to the hay fever, but hopefully I can get some relief from it soon and I can be in front of the camera again. So anyway, I hope that's been of help to some of you. And if you've liked this video, you've got this far, please do like and subscribe and hit the notification icon so you get notified of any new content that I put up. And yeah, I'll see you all in the next video.